I take a look back at the progress and milestones that occurred during 2022 on Brightline's Orlando expansion and new stations. Brightline is currently in the process of expanding its passenger rail service from its current South Florida operation to Orlando, with service expected to begin in 2023. This includes upgrade work on the existing Florida East Coast Railway between West Palm Beach and Cocoa, and entirely new construction between Cocoa and Orlando International Airport. I'll be starting with a look at the upgrades on the Florida East Coast Railway corridor. In 2022, roughly 64 miles of new double track were put into service along the corridor. When combined with the roughly 15 miles of double track put into service in 2021, this means 79 miles of double track have been put into service to date. Starting at the north end in Cocoa, where the Frontenac Improvement Project was completed between CP Frontenac and CP Cocoa. This was a joint project between Brightline and the Florida East Coast Railway to eliminate a future problematic bottleneck. It also included rerouting a portion of the Cemex City Point lead track in the middle here to make way for Brightline's future Orlando line, which can be seen on the left here. A 4-track signal bridge, the second largest on the project, was installed just north of Michigan Avenue in Cocoa. It protects CP Cocoa, which is where Brightline's Orlando line joins into the Florida East Coast Railway corridor. CP Cocoa is made up of 3 sets of crossovers, along with an additional 2 turnouts to connect to the Orlando main lines. A new siding was created through Cocoa to provide access to Cocoa Yard without blocking the new main lines. The siding track itself is the old main line, with 2 brand new main lines constructed through this area. In order to allow the higher 110 mph speeds that Brightline will bring, most of the curves on the route have to be shifted to broaden them. In this case, the Barton Curve in Rockledge, the shift was more dramatic since the existing track was going to become part of the siding, so more room was needed to make way for the 2 new tracks and their broad radius. Here's the turnout at the south end of the siding being installed. Besides a very short segment in Stewart, the entire FEC corridor is being double tracked between West Palm Beach and Cocoa. The second track here in Rockledge was activated in October. This is CP Bonaventure, which in addition to being a single crossover, is the end of the newly extended Bonaventure Industrial Area siding. And here's the CP Vieira single crossover, just north of the Vieira Boulevard crossing. South of the crossing used to be the north end of the Pineda siding. The turnout there was removed and a section of panel track installed, which allowed the former siding track to become part of the new second main line. The 2 work trains on the project, AFW1 seen here on the north end, and AFW2 on the south end, played a major role this year, delivering the ballast needed for the new tracks. Each new segment of track needs roughly 3 drops of ballast to bring it up to the final elevation, and provide enough for the shoulders. Generally speaking, AFW1 works north of Fort Pierce, while AFW2 works south. The majority of the ballast used on the project is brought in from granite mines in Georgia. At the south end of the former Pineda siding near Century Boulevard, a turnout was also removed. Here's a little of the civil preparation work that occurred after the turnout was removed before the new panel was installed. And here's the new panel being shifted into place. The second track would be built in place after the Eastern Main Line was back in service. Here's a ballast regulator at work. As part of the double tracking, the FEC is getting an all-new signal system, which means the old one, including these old searchlight signals, needed to be removed as well. There was minimal work around Melbourne this year, and while 11 miles of double track were activated between Malabar and Miko, all of that track work was completed last year. Track work finally began in Indian River County this year. Here are some ties laid out near Sebastian Boulevard in Sebastian. This is the future location of the CP Winter Beach crossover, north of the 69th Street crossing near Wabasso. You can see the two number 24 turnouts ready to be installed in the existing main line here, before the other half of the crossovers are built in place. And then in December, here's the Winter Beach Team Track turnout installed, followed by those two number 24 turnouts for the crossover also installed. Indian River County was also where the final rail train for the work along the FEC corridor was unloaded in May. Ties are laid out here near the 32nd Street crossing, where the CP Gifford crossover will be installed in 2023. Work to rebuild the crossings to add the second track was also a major priority in Indian River County, such as here at Oslo Road in Vero Beach. South of Oslo Road, double tracking work was farther along. The CP Oslo crossover is located here as well, and it was activated for service in December, along the second main line to the south of it. The section of newly activated track continues south to CP Fort Pierce. You can see the new track being used by work train AFW1 here by the Wilcox Road crossing. This is a section of the new main line a few months prior to being put into service. Here it is around the curve by the Taylor Creek Bridge in Fort Pierce. This is the largest signal bridge on the project, crossing 5 tracks at CP Fort Pierce. This area is being put into service in multiple phases, as it includes work to partially reconfigure the Fort Pierce yard. The work at the yard includes the addition of 2 new tracks at the back of the yard. Here's the new CP White City crossover, south of Midway Road in Fort Pierce. All of the new track in this area is now in service. The activated track continues to CP Rio, south of the Jensen Beach Boulevard crossing in Jensen Beach. The track work ramps back up in downtown Stuart, such as near here at the Colorado Avenue crossing. Small bridges were completed over the Manatee waterways. This is CPC branch in Port Salerno. From this point south, other than a few miles around the Loxahatchee River, double track is now in place and in service. Those last few miles should enter service in early 2023. The area south of the river was put into service in 2021, and no real work was done there this year beyond some minor punch list work that doesn't have any real visible changes. Speaking of the Loxahatchee River, we'll now shift to looking at the progress on the major bridges this year. The year started here with final preparations before the replacement work began. This included demolishing the unused side of the old bridge. The real work began in early April when the old bascule span was removed. For the next month and a half or so, a temporary span was used while preparations for the new bascule were made. This temporary span was removed twice a day to let boaters pass through. This was it being placed for the first time. Then in late May, the new bascule span was installed. This required a multiple day shutdown when the FEC could not run trains and all marine traffic was stopped. This installation also required the installation of several new spans on the rest of the bridge so everything lined up properly, such as the ones you can see on the right here. By December, all of the old bridge had been demolished and the final span of the new second track was installed. Work had also begun on installing the new track across the second half. With this bridge now completed, work to finish the second main line can continue through the area. The span with the raised blue sides provides increased clearance for boaters to pass under. Farther north at the Sebastian River Bridge, the first track of the new bridge was put into service in April. You can see crews connecting to the new track across the bridge here. Valves will be placed later in the day. Work quickly shifted to demolishing the old bridge so the second track of the new one could be built in its place. By August, the demolition work was nearing completion. Pile driving was well along, and work was beginning on the bent caps. The southernmost span was completed early on, so the crane based on the bank here could be moved onto the temporary work trestle where it could be more useful. By early December, crews were installing the final girder for the second half of the bridge. Here it is, being lowered into place. Work here will be shifting to installing the sidewalls and pouring the ultra-high performance concrete between the spans before track is laid across the bridge in early 2023. At Turkey Creek, the first span of the first track of the new bridge was installed by my visit in April. By early June, the first half was completed and trains were shifted onto it. Here was a ballast regulator working on it as it was being activated for service. The rest of the year was focused on demolishing the old bridge. By mid-December, work had finally shifted to installing the pilings here, which were the final ones of the project. In February, the first track of the new bridge at Crane Creek had been built and track built across it. Bridge crew shifted to rebuilding the temporary work trestle on the west side, while the track crew was preparing to activate the first half. It was opened for service on February 20th. At that point, crews began demolishing the old bridge, so the second half of the new one could be built in its place. Work started with a major focus on the northern end, so that Melbourne Avenue could be reopened under it. The old bridge was almost 100 years old, so the time had definitely come to replace it. By August, the majority of the demolition work was completed and pile driving was well underway. In mid-November, the final span of the second half of the bridge was installed. And here's a look with all of the spans in place. The final bridge we'll look at is at the Ogallie River. In April, all the piers for the first track of the new bridge were in place, ready for beams to be installed. In early June, the first half was complete and put into service. By August, pile driving was underway, and about half of the old bridge was demolished. On November 30th, the final girder was installed on the second half of the bridge. Here's a look at the bridge with all of the spans in place. We'll now shift our focus to the progress on Brightline's new Orlando line between Cocoa and Orlando International Airport. Track work and ballasting has been the major focus this year. At the beginning of the year, the Narcousie Road overpass was nearing completion. From this look near the end of the year, it was finished with track in place across it. Two tracks, like seen here, are in place from the airport to the east side of State Road 417. This is the number 32.75 turnout, where the two tracks join into a single one for the rest of the way to Cocoa. This is the largest concrete-tied turnout in the United States, and trains can pass through it at almost 80 miles per hour. It takes 5 switch machines to move the points and movable point frog. Ballasting the line has been an almost continuous process throughout the year to get enough ballast on the tracks. The line has 2 work trains, with the western one doing the majority of the work. Deliveries of ballast are made by CSX to this temporary connection to the OUC Stanton branch line on the left here. Here are ties laid out and rails staged near Dallas Boulevard in April. Shifting to July, and the track is built and has its initial ballast in place. At the State Road 520 bridge, the year began with a lot of work still to accomplish. This bridge, along with the rest on the line, are being built so that they'll be easy to double track in the future as demand requires. In July, the track had been skeletonized across it. The final rail train for the project was unloaded east of 520 in August. It carries 50 pieces of rail that are each 1,600 feet long. That's enough to build 7.5 miles of track. All of the signals for the line have been installed as well. The Interstate 95 bridge has been completed, as has the Cocoa Arch Panel Tunnel under State Road 528. You can see pieces of rail being dragged into position here. In July, the one and only rail train for the Orlando line that was delivered by the east end was pushed through the Cocoa Tunnel. This was the first train to pass through the tunnel. Here it is, parked at the then end of the line near Industry Road in Cocoa. Work on the corridor through the airport was substantially completed at the beginning of the year. This enabled the first train to visit the platforms at the future Orlando station in May. This was a major milestone for the project, and officially signaled to Orlando that Brightline was here. Here's what it looked like from the train itself when it departed. With the Orlando line not connected, that train had to come and go from somewhere, and that place is the Orlando Vehicle Maintenance Facility. This facility will be the primary maintenance base for Brightline's fleet, and where they will all call home once service to Orlando begins. It features a 3-track main shop building, train wash, and wheel truing machine, along with numerous other features. Bright Blue 2 was delivered here directly from the Siemens factory in Sacramento, California in February by CSX. This was the first Brightline train in Orlando. Brightline's trains are made up of 2 SCB-40 locomotives on each end, along with 4 venture coaches in 2 levels of service. This train would be used to test the facilities here, as well as test the new tracks, like you saw earlier when it visited the station for the first time. In July, 2 more trains joined it when Bright Green 2 and Bright Pink 2 were delivered. These trains would be commissioned here, then stored until testing and service begins in 2023. You can see all 3 trains that call Orlando home in this shot. Here is Bright Pink entering the building. Shifting back to the Florida East Coast Railway corridor, the first Brightline test train north of West Palm Beach ran in January up to Cocoa and back. This was the first time most people in these communities had ever seen a Brightline train. These test trains continued north of where Brightline's service will actually run as part of the training process. These training runs continued on and off for the first part of the year, like this one in Miko in May. In the second half of the year, its appearances were mostly limited to when new sections of double track were being put into service, with the trains being used to test the new tracks and signal system. In November, these test trains shifted to beginning the 110 mph higher speed testing on a section of completed track between Fort Pierce and Jensen Beach. To wrap up this 2022 year in review, we'll head to look at the two new stations that opened in Brightline's existing South Florida operation in Boca Raton and Aventura. We'll start in Boca Raton. My first trip down south was in April, and at that point, the site was simply cleared, with some initial work on the foundation for the parking garage complete, and some initial forms in place for the station. Then in June, the platform was beginning to take shape. The foundation for the station had risen, and the parking garage had seen significant progress with the walls raised. Only the back portion of the garage still had to go up. By October, the station's walls had risen, and windows were beginning to be installed. A new track had been installed to service the platform. The platform structure was complete, and some of the additional structures were beginning to rise on it. The tower that will eventually lead to an overpass and second platform in the future was also rising. While it looked rough and had many disbelievers, it opened 2 months later with a ribbon cutting on December 20th. This is the station's entrance. And this is the Smart Lounge inside. Outside, the platform canopy was complete, and the building was painted with landscaping surrounding it. The parking garage was also complete and ready for vehicles. And here's the first train to depart the station with passengers, featuring a special consist to carry VIPs. We'll now shift to Aventura. On my first visit of the year in April, work was just beginning on the platform, and the first forms for concrete were in place. The main structure for the station building itself was complete. The tower that would eventually connect to the pedestrian overpass to the platform was still being worked on. The signature V structure over the entrance had also recently been installed. Now moving into June, and the platform structure had taken shape, and the canopy was beginning to rise. Work was also beginning on the platform's tower. The canopy for the low-level platform that will be used by a future commuter rail service was also under construction. The station tower had been topped off and was beginning to be painted. Escalators were installed inside. Now in October, and the pedestrian overpass had been installed, linking the station and platform. A new set of stairs that's meant for future commuters was in place. The tower on the platform was far enough along to support the overpass. A solar panel canopy was installed behind the station, where a future transit stop will be located. The parking lot had also taken shape and was ready to be paved. Now on December 20th, and the station was ready for the ribbon cutting. The station was fully painted and signage in place. A special banner was hung on the overpass to help signal that the station was ready. Only one track is being used initially, with work on the second to come in the future. The platform tower was also completed. Heading inside, and this is the entrance. This is the Smart Lounge, where the majority of the passengers will wait for the train. The station also features an autonomous market, where guests can pick up snacks and beverages. And here was the first departure from the station, with a trainload of VIPs. Thanks for watching this look back at the progress in 2022. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Also check out my social media pages